Introduce the next speaker, Emanuele Di Lorenzo, who's at Brown University and has been so active in PICES for so many years, is the co-chair of the POC committee, I have it, and will give us some inspiration here. And I would say he's a PICES influencer.
Thank you. Just one moment, I have to set up the screen thing here. Second. Okay, we can bring it on the main screen. Okay, great. Thank you for having me here. And today I am not going to talk as a scientist, but I'm really going to talk as the chairman of Ocean Visions, which is a nonprofit, talking about how we're trying to go about co-designing climate solutions under the UN Ocean Decade. And for this reason, let me just introduce Ocean Visions. Ocean Visions was established in 2019 by a group of research institutions, mostly in the United States, who made a pledge to really accelerate the transformation of science and engineering to solutions that were practical and also equitable. And in doing so, they recognized that it was important to actually partner with impact accelerators and other groups like GEOS that can actually help research institutions deploy their science for solutions. And so the Ocean Visions is organized with a research consortium that you see on this side of this slide, and then an acceleration and impact partners that are on this side. And then the nonprofit really sits on top of it and tries to essentially make sure that there's coordination between these two groups. And why do we want this type of connectivity? Well, the idea is that we're trying to develop an ecosystem for ocean solutions that can actually accelerate the connection between the various stages of deploying solutions, which are the research, the development, and deployment. And so this schematic here sort of shows the path where we have the researchers here, and then the innovation ecosystem over here for the development of solution, and then, you know, the investment component to actually deploy these solutions and scale them with venture capital, not just funds and so forth. Now, with the beginning of the decade, this concept of an ecosystem for ocean solutions became sort of appealing, and so we thought maybe we could scale this up with other international partners. And so last year, or well, 2 years ago now, we submitted a proposal to the UN Ocean Decade to establish a global ecosystem for ocean solutions together with many partners, among who is also PICES. Now, the goal here, as it's stated on the proposal, is to establish a vibrant, multi-sector community to co-design and co-deploy equitable, durable, and scalable ocean-based solutions for climate change and the ocean grand challenges. And before I dive into how this ecosystem works, let me just acknowledge some of the people that some of you may want to contact. First is our international program director, Dr. Leonardo Valenzuela Perez from Chile, and the two co-chairs of the Science Steering Committee, Fiorenza Micheli from Stanford and Anna Zivian from the Ocean Conservancies. So, how does the GEOS ecosystem work? What is the idea behind it? At the very basic level, the ecosystem is composed of three components that are interactive. The first component is not new to this group, and it's really the network. And the purpose of the network is to convene a multi-sector and multidisciplinary community. And here when I say multi-sector, I mean not just researchers like us in science and engineering perhaps, but also people from industry and so forth. The next pillar is this idea of convening task forces where we take these experts and we put them together to sort of co-design system-level solutions to the grand challenges. And what I mean here is really to bring people together to be the think tank of how do we deploy solutions that are more than just, you know, one startup or one solution here and there. How do we design solutions, for example, to removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? And then the third pillar of the GEOS ecosystem is really the GEOS innovation engine. And the goal of this innovation engine is really to act, to prototype, accelerate, and fund, you know, the solutions that we're interested in. So with that said, let me just spend a few words to explain these different components. I think on the network side, we're very familiar with what the networks do. They host summits, and so in fact, in 2021, we hosted the first international GEOS summit that was hosted on 5 international campuses, and I'm happy to report that 25% of the participants were early career ocean professionals who organized about 7 of the sessions. But the other important aspect of the network is also to put together groups of experts that can be accessible on demand to help the development of solutions in certain areas where sometimes you don't have enough capacity in terms of science and engineering. So moving forward, let's talk about the co-design process. So GEOS is focusing on trying to advance system-level solutions in 5 themes. The first theme is ocean-based solutions to the climate crisis, and here really is mostly focused on how do we solve the carbon problem. The second one is equitable solutions for coastal communities. The third is ocean human health. The fourth is marine circular economies, and the fifth one is sustainable blue foods. So how do we plan to design these system-level solutions? Here, we're going to experiment with the model that has been successful for ocean visions in the United States. And it's the idea to develop solution roadmaps. So what is a solution roadmap? Here's an example of something that Ocean Visions published a few years ago of ocean solution roadmaps in the area of removing CO2 using ocean-based processes. And here there are 4, for example, pathways for removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. One, for example, here is macroalgae cultivation. So here the idea is that we can grow forests, of phytoplanktonic forests or even kelps in the open ocean, absorb CO2 and then sink these forests in the deep ocean. Now this is an appealing idea, but how do we go from where we are today with the technologies that we have and the understanding that we have to a tomorrow where actually we can implement this type of technology for removing carbon at scale? And so the roadmaps are intended to essentially articulate what is the path to bring us from where we are today to where we want to be in terms of deploying these technologies. And in doing so, we want to articulate, for example, what are the research gaps and also what are the innovation gaps that we have to overcome, identify priorities and so forth. So these roadmaps live digitally and are constantly updated by the community of practice that have developed them in the first place. And so they provide essentially a place where there's a common consensus about what are the priorities to advance solutions in certain areas. And so our plan is to develop similar solution roadmaps for other themes that were listed before. So, of course, once we have these solution roadmaps will inform and energize the innovation engine that will act. And here I want to spend a few words to introduce the innovation engine, which is deployed through one of our implementing partners, which is called the 1000 Ocean Startup. This is essentially, it's a global coalition of accelerators, venture funds, and incubators that have come together under the decade and pledged to develop 1,000 startups by the end of the decade. And I'd like to just run a short video about this.
We are the 1000 Ocean Startups Coalition, a coalition of competitions, incubators, accelerators, matching platforms, and venture capital funds across the globe, supporting innovation to restore ocean health and contribute to UN Sustainable Development Goal number 14, life below water.
We help these ocean startups achieve their full potential by bringing them needed expertise, networks, mentorship, visibility, and funding.
Our coalition comes together to create synergies and learnings to maximize the impact of our ocean innovation ecosystem.
Our mission responds to the transformation of the sustainable ocean economy,
recommended by the Ocean Panel and the program guideline of the UN Ocean Decade.
The ocean is the blue lung of our planet and the main regulator of our planet. It both feeds us and inspires us. Yet, activity as humans and societies has undermined this very ecosystem on which most of the life on our planet depends. The ocean's ability to function and its biodiversity are falling at an alarming rate, suffering from multiple forms of pollution, over-exploitation, and climate change.
Addressing these immense and urgent challenges requires innovation to drive rapid systemic change. We need to reinvent the status quo and propose fundamentally more sustainable and efficient ways to produce and consume.
In doing so, we will create economic and social opportunities
driven by businesses which can be funded by private capital
and therefore scale their solutions rapidly.
This is critical as time is running out.
The good news is that it is possible, and we hold the keys in our own hands.
Okay, so this was just a little inspirational video, but what are the main actions that we need to take? Well, the first one that we can do using these roadmaps is to essentially mobilize new funding for research and innovation. Traditionally, investing in ocean innovation has been risky because, you know, the ocean is a complex place to work in. And so the idea is that these roadmaps, by providing a consensus kind of view of the critical technology, can actually also inform the investment world. And the second point here is that once we have this new funding, we can then deploy pilot projects that can also be run by these startups to actually test these new technologies and solutions that are not just technological in nature, but can also be social science in nature. And then the third pillar is we also have to measure whether all the things that we're doing are actually having an impact, a beneficial impact on the ocean innovations. And so I'd like to go through these pillars briefly. And the first thing that I want to say is that this model of developing these roadmaps has been quite successful, for example, in the context of these ocean carbon dioxide removal roadmaps. And in fact, we managed to mobilize over $20 million of funding that was released in 3 research calls that were essentially targeting different critical areas of research and also innovation. And you know, for people like us, for example, I know that there are a lot of modelers in this room, and one of these funds was actually for modeling the CO2 cycle and trying to understand if we have technology to store CO2 in the ocean, how can we measure it, realistically, given that we have all this natural variability in the ocean in terms of the CO2 cycle. So this is really a plug also for people that are in science and engineering like us to figure out how we can contribute to this sort of innovation. And our goal and our plan is that hopefully using this approach, we can also mobilize or at least access new funds that are becoming online. Last year, or 2 years ago, I don't remember exactly, but at COP26, there was a release of a new $10 billion fund that was really for supporting sustainable economies in the global south. And so hopefully by co-developing these roadmaps with partners in the global south, we can also unlock these type of potentials. So the next phase, as I say, is pilot projects and new startups. And here's an example of a startup that was funded through this process. It's called Running Tide. And this startup is actually piloting the idea of growing macroalgae forests, in particular kelp forests, in the middle of the Atlantic, and then sink them in the deep ocean. And of course, as we invest in this pilot, what we also do is we partner these startups with a group of experts, a panel of expert scientists in engineering that can actually evaluate and advise these startup projects. And in particular, on things like, what is the impact of putting this carbon in the deep ocean? How is the marine ecosystem going to respond? How about the ocean currents? Are the ocean currents, do we have to consider their impact as we try to sink this carbon? So these are all challenges that actually require scientists to be involved. And here I mentioned one of these startups, but the idea is that there are other startups that are coming online. And in particular, we can also help these startups, access additional fundings. For example, there was a release of the X Prize, which is $100 million for carbon removal. And right now, we have this launch pad, which is essentially advising and supporting startups that are trying to compete for the Carbon X Prize with solution technologies that are ocean-based. As I said, of course, we have all this startup world, innovation world that is coming online, but we also need to measure, if these startups are having an impact. And to do so, with the 1000 Ocean Startup last year, actually this year at the Ocean Conference, we released something called the Ocean Impact Navigator, which is essentially a new impact measurement framework for the ocean innovation ecosystem. And I just want to give you some example of the type of metrics that we've developed to measure ocean impact. There are essentially 6 metrics that this framework measures. 3 of them are connected to direct ocean health and are listed here in blue, 1, 2, 3. And one is sustainable managed ocean resources, a clean ocean, thriving and restoring marine habitats. The other 2 are really directed to the climate change challenge. And in particular, number 4 is really about, does your startup contribute, for example, towards achieving the 1.5 goal of climate? And then the other one, number 5, is about resilient coastal communities. And then we have number 6 metric, which is really more across all of them, which has to do with the positive impacts on socioeconomic outcomes, which include both well-being and also equity. Now, I'm not going to show you the actual technical framework, but the idea is that there is a technical sheets that we can actually deploy to measure, more accurately all these different elements. So with that said, I gave you sort of a quick example, or at least an overview of this GEOS ecosystem and how it's supposed to work. And now I just want to mention a few things about what are some of the GEOS projects. Well, one of them is, in fact, the Ocean Impact Navigator, which is this measurement framework. And we just released the first phase, which is really developing the framework. But the next phase is we'll actually try to implement this framework more widely. And the advantage that we have is because there is this global coalition of accelerators and venture funds, we hope to leverage that to actually make this a standard for going forward. The second project that was endorsed more recently is called Cities. And Cities is really about coastal cities that are trying to develop resilient strategies to sea level and climate change. And I will talk more about this in a second. So the Cities project is really focused on the GEOS theme too, which is equitable solutions for coastal communities. And the idea behind it is that we can actually bring many cities around the world to share solutions, with each other to sort of understand how to better tackle sea level rise. And before I go into depth, I just want to acknowledge the program manager of Cities, which are listed in this page here, Theo and Lisa and Sarah. And these are actually early career ocean professionals. And they're leading this incredible effort. And in particular, Cities is focusing now on 5 regions that are shown here in this map, because obviously going global immediately is not something that is feasible. And in these different places, they're essentially running workshops and connecting with stakeholders, and so all the things that a lot of us have done, perhaps. So going back then, the first goal of Cities is really to bring stakeholders from these major cities to declare their alignment to share their solutions to sea level rise. And in fact, they released a declaration from mayors from around the world, pledging to actually join this effort. And this is actually a mayor from one of the cities in Japan, which is one of our PICES country. So this is step 1. And then step 2 is to collect the available knowledge and develop shared best practices that can inform national and international adaptation policy. So that's sort of the goal of Cities, and we can perhaps summarize these 2 goals with these 2 bullets here. One is the community science and engagement, and another one is adaptation public policies. This particular phase of City will end in 2023. And so we're already thinking ahead, what's going to come next. Now, if we look at these 2 bubbles, these 2 bubbles are essentially building blocks of an equitable and scalable solution roadmap for coastal resilience. But obviously, there's a lot more that needs to be done. This is not sufficient. And for example, we heard this morning of the important role of sustainable blue economies for some of the small island states. And in fact, one of the building blocks that we have identified is called equitable coastal economies. Essentially, we need to develop solutions that fit in the coastal solution economy so that, it actually improves the well-being of people. Now, these roadmaps that are listed here for the coastal resilience are focused on social equity and justice, but we also have technological roadmaps. And the two that we have identified here is one, developing observing system for the coast and people that are meant to improve human health. And here health is thought really more widely, right? We always think about the physical measure like sea level, but people at the coast, especially in underrepresented countries and underrepresented communities, worry about air quality, water quality. And so these are actually part of the observing system that we need to develop to actually create a resilient community. The other aspect here is to develop modeling and prediction data and tools that can support, of course, different types of planning. Going forward, though, it's also important to recognize that the development of tools and policy cannot happen in isolation, and communities also need access to expert networks so that all these frameworks and tools don't come in a vacuum, but come, with the expertise. And in addition to that, we also have one roadmap that is about to building capacity, expert capacity in the end users themselves. We cannot just go there and always try to do things for everyone else. So with that said, there's one last roadmap that I forgot, which is developing these decision-making frameworks for optimization. What I mean here is that, when decision makers at the coast have to take decisions, often they have to have consideration that are not just physical in nature, for example, flooding and sea level rise, but they also have financial consideration, equity consideration. So how do we model those together so that we can actually optimize decision with all these different metrics in mind? And this is an area actually of science that is, is in great need of development. We don't really have it yet. So given the complexity of developing all these roadmaps together, what we thought to do in the United States is to launch a pilot where we would bring 20 or 30 communities, underrepresented communities, to attempt to co-design and deploy a shared set of solution roadmap for coastal resilience. And this pilot has different goals. One first goal and step is to clearly articulate the coastal solution challenges that are shared at the national and regional scales, and also importantly, identify processes that could help develop a community vision. And what are the values for adaptation? And the community vision for what the coast we want, we heard it this morning, is really important because that varies. Different communities have different visions for their coast. And that's the first starting ground to really, and really it falls under the roadmap of community science and engagement. The second step is really to co-develop the next generation of modeling and prediction and observing system tools that are at the scale where people live and make decisions. And I'll give you an example shortly, but for example, in the United States, we have a lot of coastal observing systems that are very efficient in observing the ocean at the coast, but a lot of the communities actually live in the wetlands where we don't really have observations. So to this end, actually in the United States, we held a series of what we called coastal solution workshops, where we went around the different coasts of the United States and we collected a series of case studies of where research universities were actually working with local coastal communities to develop solutions for observing system and modeling system that would inform decision makers. The third step here is that we want to co-design also shared workflows where tools, resources, and processes are integrated within the human infrastructure for planning coastal solutions to climate. And what we mean here is, again, that often we have a lot of tools that are out there and could potentially help communities, but communities don't know how to access these tools, don't know which one to pick, don't know how to use them. And so we need to provide communities also with the human infrastructure of the expert networks, the practitioners that could actually make those tools make sense. And at this regard, in fact, the Center for Sea Rise Solution is actually developing a national community of practice that will serve, hopefully, as the glue that brings the tools and data into the proper context, and in doing so, advance the planning and implementation of solution actions. Moving forward, the last part that we hope to accomplish is to leverage these roadmaps to engage and mobilize investment capitals, as I said before, and also federal funds from Congress to activate these coastal communities and their supporting expert networks. And just this year, we had some initial success in doing so. And in fact, in the state of Georgia, we were able to leverage some of the senators of the state and receive an earmark to actually start with 4 pilot communities in Georgia, this sort of process of developing these roadmaps. And the idea here is that we will do this with other communities around the states to bring, a core communities of maybe 20, 30. And before I end, I just want to give some examples of the work that is going on in these coastal communities of Georgia. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of observing system, what you see on this map is essentially tide gauges along the coast, the east coast of the United States. And, sea level rise and flooding is a real issue along the east coast of the United States. But most of the people are really located across the ocean land and nested within these complex wetlands. So this is the city and port of Savannah. And so you can see that in this region here of the city of Savannah and their communities, there's only 1 tide gauge. Obviously, that is not sufficient data to plan against flooding and sea level rise. And so in this community, what we did is we launched a project called the Smart Sea Level Sensor, where a set of engineers from Georgia Tech developed cheap technologies, cheap sensors that are wireless interconnected, and now we have a coverage of water levels all across this area. And now this water level network that is at the scale of the city was not just brought in by the scientists, but actually was co-designed and deployed with the local communities and stakeholders. And in fact, most of these sensors were built from students in high school and are actually adopted by families who actually maintain the sensors in their backyard. And this network is currently growing because, as I said earlier, people are interested in air quality and other measures that really is contingent to their well-being. And so this is happening right now. We also develop other community engagement strategies that really bring also the elderly to actually transfer their knowledge and contribute their knowledge. And this is an example of what we call the map room, where citizens come and draw essentially their knowledge of their flooding patterns, what they have experienced over the years. And so we collect that knowledge and then we reflect it back to them. Another important aspect is also to build capacity within the end users. And so we also could develop with some of the decision makers some of these tools, like in this case, this is a portal that helps the city of Savannah monitor their bridges, because sometimes if they're touched by salty water, they have to go and maintain them. And then last, we also developed a modeling component and forecasting component with the prediction system that essentially provides 3 days forecast, which was used in the last 2 hurricanes, successfully. So all these, exercises provide insight in these roadmaps and elements of these roadmaps, for one particular community. So, of course, the idea is that we want to use this approach, but bring together pilot communities from other places to also co-design these shared roadmaps together and use this as a living database for how we can actually advance together solutions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, developing a picture of roadmaps like this for the globe is going to be extremely challenging, if not impossible, and there's no one organization that can do that. And so the idea is that perhaps, different programs under the decade, different projects can actually contribute, independently to different bits of this important puzzle. And so in saying that perhaps this road mapping exercise could serve as a mechanism for really co-designing solutions across different decade actions and really be cooperative in going forward. And because of that, to this end, just this year, we launched one of the US, actually the only US collaborative centers for under the decade. It's called the Center for Ocean Climate Solutions, which is hosted in Atlanta. And the idea is that the center will develop as a resource a digital platform to host these roadmaps and allow different programs and different decade actions to contribute to this particular solution strategy of co-design. I want to end here. So I spoke about 2 of the projects that are ongoing, but there are other projects that are currently being developed. And in GEOS, we also care very much about the younger generations, not just the ECOP, but even the people that come before ECOP. And one incredible way to reach the younger generation these days is through gaming. They're always on gaming computers. And so by partnering with another implementing partner called Stride, we are currently developing a Minecraft world that really sets a whole bunch of challenges in how we create ocean sustainable cities. And believe it or not, this gaming is quite successful. And I just want to leave you with a teaser closing my talk about this Minecraft world.
Welcome to Rehab Lab, a newly formed sustainable ocean city. Come join our team of experts who've dedicated their lives to nurturing and protecting our oceans. Your first challenge is taking on the battle against plastics in our waterways. Guide the plastic recovery boat through the estuary to collect all the plastic heading into the ocean. You'll learn about the most common plastics removed from the water and how we can prevent them from getting into the water again. On your way back to the lab, rescue a sea turtle and bring it back for emergency care and rehabilitation. The next task is to collect mysterious pollution in the water that is threatening our entire marine ecosystem. Collect all the pollution to restore the ocean quality and deliver samples back to the lab. You'll learn the source of several types of ocean pollution and how to prevent it from coming back in the future. Even though we moved as quickly as possible, our coral reef has suffered serious damage.
I guess the audio is not very good, but here the challenge is about building an ocean floating cities using technologies that are actually realistic, like, for example, wind energy, wave energy, and other sources of food. And so the students will have to each student will have a challenge of developing their own cities, and then, there's going to be a competition. So anyway, this was just maybe a little bit too much in PICES to show you a Minecraft world, but I want to thank you for your time, and I hope that you will engage. Bye.